President here at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Monmouth County. It's my pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon. It's an honor to continue our support and friendship with the Monmouth Center for World Religions and Ethical Thought on this, the occasion of the 17th Annual Shanti Lecture. The two groups share a commitment to promoting religious education and coexistence through programs such as tonight's. At this time, I would like to introduce the Monmouth Center's co-coordinator, Reverend Elizabeth Congdon.
Thank you, Joan. And we'd like to thank the UU congregation of Monmouth County for your hospitality and your warm welcome. And welcome to this, the 17th Shanti Lecture. We certainly are glad that you are here. I ask you to join me in silencing your phone. And I want to mention that the bathrooms are in the hall. If you turn left as you leave this auditorium, you will find them on your right. We invite you to become a friend of the Monmouth Center for World Religions and Ethical Thought. And we have a very simple application, and the only way we use that is to send you programs and information about future programs that we have. And do join us in interfaith dialogue. We need your help. I want to mention a few things. On Sunday, September 25th, with 48 teenagers, we began the Mosaic 4 year. Mosaic stands for Mobilizing Our Students for Action to Build Interfaith Community. It's our teen multi-faith project where we visit other houses of worship, learn about other faiths, as well as work together in community service projects. You can learn more about this very exciting and fun endeavor on our website, www.interfaithmcwret.org. And learn also on Facebook about Teens Against Intolerance. More information is available on the information table, and we ask that you join us and ask us questions and join us at our social time afterwards for some celebration and gratitude. We invite you also to join us on November 20th for United We Sing. And Esmond is sitting here, she coordinates that program. And we're trying to get that together for November 20th, the Sunday before Thanksgiving at 4 p.m. We come here and have a wonderful celebration with people from many different faiths participating. We'll have a basket in the community room during refreshments and would appreciate your donations, and they will help defray some of the costs of the Shanti Lecture. We are delighted today to have Mr. and Mrs. Harinder Singh with us, and very happy that they made it. And we look forward to his presentation. It will be followed with a time of questions and answers, and then the reception to follow. We're very grateful in the Shanti Lecture for the Shanti Endowment Fund, and that was made possible through the Chadha family. It was instituted in 1996 by Roshan and Ellen Chadha, and also Bhushan and Subhash Chadha, and their dedicated endowment fund for this purpose. And it was to honor their parents, Mr. and Mrs. Sriram and Shanti Chadha. The main purpose of the Shanti Lecture is to provide greater information about South Asian religions and other lesser-known religions in the United States, and to foster interfaith dialogue. The emphasis has broadened to include the advancement of peace and religious freedom. Roshan and Ellen were unable to be with us today. Roshan is the Monmouth Center Coordinator Emeritus, and for 50 years was a member of this congregation. He and Ellen were the backbone of the Monmouth Center, and they now live in Virginia. It is good to see Sri Ram and Shanti Chada's family who are with us today, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And we're going to hear from Ashish and Ravina, as well as Arum and Kelly Chada in a minute. After they speak, Dr. Sarmeet Kanwal will introduce our speaker, who is a board member for the Monmouth Center, is also the co-coordinator for Mosaic, and an adjunct professor at Brookdale, as well as being on the Shanti planning team. Now we'd like to hear from Sri Ram and Shanti's family, and then from Sarmeet. I welcome you to come forward.
Yes, we didn't get it. Well, did we get everyone? Yeah. All right, we didn't get everyone, but okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashish Mohan. I'm one of Sri Ram and Shanti Chada's grandsons, and this is my wife, Ravina, you know, and then Arun Chada, and then Kelly Chada as well. So we all have parts to read. I'm going to go first, and my part is I'm reading a verse that was created by the fifth Guru, Sri Guru Arjan Dev Ji, documented on page 885 of Sri Guru Granth Ji, which is a Sikh holy book. I will not attempt to speak in Punjabi, but I'll speak for the English version of I'll go by the English translation, so here goes. Some call him Ram, others call him Khuda, some serve him as Gosaya, and others as Allah. Almighty Lord is the cause of causes. He showers His grace and mercy upon us. Some pilgrims bathe at sacred shrines. Others go on Hajj to Mecca. Some do devotional worship, whilst others bow their heads in prayer. Some read the Vedas and some the Quran. Some wear blue robes and some wear white. Some call themselves Muslim, and some call themselves Hindu. Some yearn for paradise, and others long for heaven. Says Nanak, one who realizes the God's will knows the secrets of Almighty God.
Whatever I ask for from my Lord and Master, He gives that to me. Says Servant Nanak, let me be connected with your will, that whatever I may utter out of my mouth becomes true here and hereafter. He has extended His power in all four directions and placed His hand upon my head. Gazing upon me with His eye of mercy, He has dispelled the pains of His servant. The Guru, the Enlightener, the Manifestor of the universe, protects His humble servants. Hugging me close in His embrace, the merciful, forgiving Lord has erased all my sins.
One God is the only treasure of peace. I have heard that He is eternal and imperishable. He is entirely pervading water, land, and sky. He is composed in each and every heart. He looks alike upon the high and the low, the ant and the elephant. Friends, companions, children, and relatives are all created by Him. O Nanak, one who is blessed with the Naam enjoys Lord's love and affection.
You are our Master. To you I offer this humble prayer. This body and soul are all your belonging. You are our mother and father, and we are your children. In your grace we experience ultimate peace. No one knows your infinite vastness. O highest of the high, most generous God, the whole creation is strung on your thread. That which has come from you is in your will. You alone know your existence and vastness. Nanak, your slave, is forever surrendering to you. Thank you.
And I forgot to introduce the great-grandkids of Sri Ram and Shanti Chada. So this is Arav, this is Ashna, and Avir.
And years later, they would come in.
I hope so.
Yes.
My name is Sarabmeet Canwell, and I'm here to introduce the speaker for today. I met Harinder, I think maybe the first time 6 or 7 years ago. I found out about a workshop that was being given at my place of worship in Bridgewater, New Jersey, and it turned out that that workshop was delivered by Harinder. I was really impressed with what he had to say and his style of delivery and his passion on the topic that he was talking about. And ever since, I've always wanted to have him come and speak to this audience. The opportunity came this year when Roshan Chadha, who is one of the organizers, suggested that we have someone speak on Sikhism this year. And I right away thought about Harinder, and luckily for me, by then, he and his wife had actually moved to New Jersey, which made the job a little bit easier. So let me tell you a little bit about our speaker today. Harinder calls himself an activist and an educator. And indeed, those are the two things that stand out from his resume. He has done a tremendous amount of teaching and educating, and he is also an extremely active activist that I have come across. So to tell you a little bit about his activities, Harinder is the principal of the 12G Force Consulting. He consults on Sikhism and matters having to do with our home state in India, which is Panjab. He's also an organizer of a new movement which he has gotten very involved in during the last year. It is called the Free Akal Takht movement, and it's focused on developing a self-governance model for the 30 million Sikhs, that's the total number of Sikhs that are in the world, a self-governance model for all of those Sikhs that is driven by the Sikh paradigm in a very open, inclusive, and transparent manner. And he might tell you more about that. He's also the co-founder of the Sikh Research Institute, which is an educational organization focused on knowledge transfer of Sikhism based on, quote-unquote, think like a Sikh approach, grounded in the scripture, history, and the lifestyle associated with Sikhism. Harinder is the co-founder of the Panjab Digital Library, which is an online repository revealing the invisible heritage of Punjab. So he basically takes a lot of the literature that exists in our history and he helps to get that digitized so that it's accessible to millions of people that can benefit from it. Harinder envisioned and developed a K-12 curriculum in order to teach the Sikh culture to the children in this country and throughout the world. He has consulted on numerous films and documentaries on Sikhism. He has been a presenter at the Worldwide Forum on Political, Cultural, and Religious Insights on South Asian Realities. He has co-authored a textbook on the Sikh Holy Book. He has written about 30 articles on Sikhism. He has made thousands of presentations on various topics throughout the world. He has appeared on hundreds and thousands of radio programs, as well as a couple of hundred television programs. He holds a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering, a master's in engineering management, and an MPhil in Guru Granth Sahib, which is the Sikh Holy Book. And as I told you before, he currently resides in North Jersey. We are very, very fortunate today to have him come and speak to us, and I would now like to invite him for his keynote talk.
Good afternoon, and as we say in the Sikh greetings, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and let me take a second to explain that. The greeting actually says, if I even just loosely and literally translate it, that the awesome wisdom is the one where the Jedi warriors belong to. I'm using American parlance from Star Wars now. And if there is ever any victory, it belongs to the divine, not the ones who are performing the divine act. Now, that's a reminder to the Sikhs, which I personally like to do many a time within the Sikh community. But today, we are in a different environment, and what I would like to focus on is, I was told the elements of peace, as well as this, what I'm calling Begampura. Begampura, and as you can see, it says city without sorrow, but what does that really mean? I'll get into it. It's sort of like, the utopian visions which cultures, communities, religions, psychologists, philosophers come up with their utopian visions. Like Sir Thomas More is the first one to get credit for even coining the term utopia. So Begampura is something of that nature, which is articulated in the Sikh scriptural canon, which is Guru Granth Sahib. You heard elements of that from the Chadha family. And I want to talk about what that utopian vision is and how that vision actually became an established reality in South Asia. But I want to talk about it from a perspective of how is this relevant to 1.2 billion people today? How it has absolutely nothing to do with what Jefferson, our president and founding father, used to say. It has absolutely nothing to do with whether you believe in one God or three God or no God, because the realities of your belief system apply to everyone, but your work is dependent on your belief system. It's sort of like the doors when you enter today. Do you know what your own belief system is? It was quoting Gita up there. Let me also mention that, it's great to be back at a Unitarian Universalist church, or congregation actually, to be more accurate. My introduction to that happened in high school in Kansas City, which is where I grew up, with Vern Barnett, if anyone knows him. Maybe the congregation here knows him. And my conversations with Unitarians, because at that time there was no Gurdwara in Kansas City where I was growing up, or what was generally called Sikh place of worship, which I actually say it's not a place of worship, according to the scripture. The Gurdwara actually means place of learning, because Sikh tradition believes you can worship wherever you want to. You don't need a sacred space to do it, which is very antithetical to popular belief systems sometimes. So going from my own interfaith journeys of, I used to call Unitarians in those days the thinking religious people, not the classically ritualistic religious people. And I loved it because it was food for thought and philosophical ideas, but without belittling the religious, which is very important. Then, I moved on to having conversations with Catholic Church during my university days, to going into some Baha'i congregation, getting involved in race unity days, and at some point with SCLC, which is Southern Christian Leadership Council, with the Rainbow Coalitions and the post-Martin Luther King sort of ideas. And what I learned with all of those journeys, and eventually my own journey of religions, to be very honest, because I believe religion per se is a little different than being religious, because they're a bit two different things. And those are usually, not usually, they ought to be a conscious choice. When they're not a conscious choice, you end up getting classically religious, who actually end up disturbing lots of things. And it's not, I'm paraphrasing, maybe some of you, I'm sure all of you are aware of him. Again, in college days, I read this book. It was called Road Less Traveled. I'm sure you guys know who I'm talking about. Okay. That psychiatrist, hundreds and millions of copies sold, as they call it. Dr. who? Scott Peck. Because he wrote that, he classified religious people in 4 different categories, and he basically said most are stuck in the category 2, where they just follow the norms, whatever has been prescribed, either by the clergy or the leadership or whatever it might be. But that really doesn't get you very far. It might get you to some frustration, though. So you're going to have some atypical stuff going on today. Because I think we got to have fun with these things, although these are serious topics, but you got to have fun with it. When you get too worked up, you can't smile about things, then, people end up doing some absurd things with religion as well. And there's a long history of that too. Okay, so this is also from Guru Arjan, and you will notice the language I choose to use. The language of Guru Granth Sahib is gender neutral. The language of Guru Granth Sahib, when it's allegorically talking about, is feminine. So to even present the divine, or generally what we call God, as he, becomes problematic already, because in the original it isn't. So it is neither theology, or if you are a feminist, neither theology or nor theology. It actually becomes something else. So what is that something else? We'll talk about, it actually use the word sovereign. Sovereign is somebody who's independent, where the ideas are not borrowed or defined or deduced, but they come directly, whatever that directly means. So it says on peace, how are you going to have peace? Because this word gets overused these days. I'll be very honest, I actually stopped most interfaith conversations because, they became superfluous at some points. Because we are not talking about, today is October 9th. Today is the day Che Guevara was executed. Today is the day Malala was also part of assassination attempt. Why does that happen? And a lot of that is happening in America in a different context of First Amendment or gun rights and other issues. Peace has some real serious consequences, or before consequences. What does it take to even have peace? Are you willing to stay in a jail for 27 years like Nelson Mandela did? It is a long walk home. I don't know if you visited. I went to Robben Island. My wife and I went there. And just to even visit there outside of Cape Town, to see where he stayed for 27 years, it's going to make you something else. But even then, withstanding your principles and awaiting and having that level of patience, maybe that's religiosity instead of going through your notions. My point is, peace is not something what we are calling these days, which sounds good, or something which feels good, or we wear a t-shirt symbol or a earring. It's fine. You can do all that. But peace actually requires a lot of work. A lot of work. And what Guru Arjan Sahib here, who is actually the architect of Guru Granth Sahib, the Sikh scriptural tradition, he says, when the sovereign ordains, what does that mean? I'm interpreting what's written there, but what he's basically saying is, when you don't annoy people, and he uses that word, when you don't oppress people, when you don't inflict pain, that's when the peace can be seen in a compassionate regime or a benign regime, which means what? There is going to be no stability. Peace is equivalent of stability as well. Peace is only possible if your behavior, my behavior, policymakers' behavior does not inflict pain. Pain is not necessarily physical. Mostly it's, how many drugs are being prescribed for psychological pains now, right? Prozac nation, we call it. There are all sorts of pains. And until there is a level of pain being caused by your action or inaction, there cannot be peace. Which means it's work in progress. It's a perpetual process. You cannot say just because you are at peace, there will be peace. Within you there is peace, which is very important. But how are you going to make sure that you become the agent of peace as well? Which means, from a Sikh tradition angle, and this is where I'll invoke the tradition for the first time, for us, this is why we don't have a formula on it. Sikhi actually has no formula. It says you have to see what are you able to deliver, what is your gift, and how can you assure a particular lifestyle, a paradigm, whatever paradigm you're following, which allows people to not inflict pain. Okay. Quickly, on the left I put like a Google map of if you type Sikh. And what I find very funny is, what they call image mapping now in terms of how the searches go on, because nobody goes to libraries anymore. Everything is Mr. and Mrs. Google, right? Yeah. And Mr. and Mrs. Google also only give you the answers in the first page based on how much somebody has paid for that page to show up on the top 10, right? So everything, it says, don't mind me quoting Chris Rock here, maybe you don't expect that, but I'll quote Chris Rock anyway. You know what he says? Why is there still a poverty in America? Because that's also related to peace. That's why I'm bringing it up. He says, there is a poverty in America because they don't have people in Washington they can hire to do lobby for them. Every decision is paid work by lobbying. Peace is like that too. From UN to local politics, it's exactly like this. You can see this in a popular culture like in the movie Lord of War. Why is it that the most amount of money being made from violence is the exact same countries which are the 5 permanent Security Council members? There's a direct correlation there. So there are some serious policy issues. There are some serious mindset issues in terms of what your worldview is and what your belief system is, what we classically say. So on the left side, coming back to Google, when you want to know about Sikhs, people end up saying, well, the words which sound good, which I'm not going to go into, selfless service. Well, that doesn't really define a Sikh. That defines a great Presbyterian too. They have built most amount of medical hospitals in the world that anyone can even compete with. So the point is, it doesn't really tell you things which inform you about their conceptions of divinity, their worldviews. On the right side, we have icons of religions or systems, whatever you want to call them. And I just picked there. Even the most popular one from a Sikh is not even there. That's why I put one on top. It's Sikh Oankar. It's now the Khanda one, which we see in the middle, where it says with the 2 swords. It looks like an Iranian flag. That's the one which became most popular for the Sikhs. But that's not even the original one. And my point is, there is a constant spinning, just like in politics, also in religion. Just like in popular culture, so is it in religious culture. There is internal spinning of ideas, and there is external spinning of ideas, and it's happening all the time. So if you want a study of religion or a thought, you don't go ask people who are not adherents or who don't study it. It's like me going and asking a Taliban, can you tell me something about the Jesuit order? You don't do that. You gotta go and maybe visit a Jesuit order, maybe read their writings, maybe read what Assisis are doing, right? So similarly, when you want to know about a tradition, you got to at least go to their written tradition if they have it. If they have oral tradition, you ask a practitioner. That's when you get to know the nuances and other ideas as well. So it's a scripture plus the adherence, and that most of the time is not what the popular understanding of that school is, or that religion is. One of my favorite t-shirts in college days used to be unlearned, because what I had learned until the age of 16 about who Sikhs were by going to a regular congregation, and once I got to college days and started learning the language of the Sikh scriptures, once I actually studied that, I'm like, oh my God, they have been selling BS. Right? There is a lot of that. And it happens everywhere. You know that. It happens everywhere. There is actually a battle of ideas going on. Internally, externally, everywhere. Every religious community, you know this is why there is less peace even internally in the religious communities. There is sort of hijacking by the right-wingers of religion going on. They seems to be the only voice because they seem to be the most vocal voice. So there are issues. I mean, the peace is related to who eventually wins the battle of ideas, and how is that battle of ideas transcending into everyday people through the local cultures, and whether you watch Fox News or Fix News, whatever you want to call it, or MSNBC, it shapes your worldview. And that worldview is being shaped. They are sitting in some golf course or in some corridor or in somewhere, we're deciding what is their editorial policy. Just like in religious community, they're doing the same thing. They're deciding what is going to be the dominant thought. So all I'm trying to say is popular culture, yes, it has its own place even within religion, but if you want to know more, you're going to have to become a little bit more intimate. And intimacy requires spending time. In fact, I'll just introduce, I personally think religiosity matters less and less anymore. Even originally it mattered less and less. What used to matter? You look at Mary Magdalene, you look at Ali, you look at Mardana, who was a companion of Guru Nanak. You know what matters everywhere? They're lovers. They love if you want to call them prophet or whatever you want to call them. They love what is being taught. It's like a relationship is love-based. That is the single most criteria, and that is rarely even discussed anymore now. So the lovers are getting less and less. And guess what happens when you have less and less lovers? You have less and less love, even in your modus operandi, in your behavior. So religiosity used to be love. Now we use that as quotes, right? We'll say love is God and God is love. Yeah, but Victor Hugo also said it. He said it a little differently. When he said, when you take the love within you and you expand it to universe and you contract it back from universe to within you, that's love. Which means it is out and it is in and there is no difference. So love cannot be what you say at your podium in your congregation. It has to be very visible beyond the abstractness. It has to be very visible in the realities. So what is that reality? Let me start with this slide here. If you want to ask me what Sikhi is, I'm not going to tell you we wear turbans and we do this. You already know that. I mean, I call that the bylaws of the religion. Does anyone walk up to, Bill Gates and say, I want to work for Microsoft? And does Bill Gates pull out his bylaws and say, this is why you should work for Bio? No. If you're going to work for any company you go work for, you already signed that. You don't even read it many of the time. But what you do decide is, where do I want to work? Because of what they have done, or what you would like to go do with them. So this is where I say, if you want to know about any religion, you go to their conception of divinity. What is shaping their worldview? This is what shapes the worldview of the Sikhs. This is the opening stanza, loosely translated as I understand it, or interpreted perhaps, from the Sikh scriptures. This is the Sikh paradigm. It does not even invoke the word God. And mostly what you will see among Sikhs is they'll tell you the first line says there is one God. Actually, even linguistically, that's false. The most common word for God in the native Punjabi language is Rab, and it is not used. It says Ik Oankar. It's almost like a phonetic signifier, which means what? I'm a Star Wars fan, as I mentioned, so I just put it one force. All of a sudden, if you say one force, you have included what we now call people who think Richard Dawkins is their God. Right? Atheists, or humanists, or free thinkers, or any other tribal religions, because everyone believes, I worked at JPL and the most brilliant minds are there in my aerospace days. I used to be there for a while, and the most brilliant minds, they will counter and prove and disprove. Then you get into those Aristotelian things, whether God exists or not. But they all agree there is some energy and some force which exists, which can be transferred, cannot be seen. So let's work with force. And just to bring that analogy a little bit further, And I'm going to build on this analogy because popular culture and George Lucas used it very well, which was, it was based on Joseph Campbell's work. And it works. People understand that. This is what Guru Nanak said. He said, Ikko Onkar, there is only one. There is oneness. Whatever that oneness is. What is that? How are you going to feel that oneness? Well, do you identify with truth? That's what he said. I'm not interested in any names or fixations. I'm interested in identification with truth. It's a pervasive creator, which means it's everywhere. It does not have a sacred space where he or she lives. It's fearless, which means if you choose to worship the divine, whatever you call your divine, in the Sikh paradigm, how can you be fearful of that entity? It's fearless. So don't go, religion has become biggest business. You guys know this. According to US data, it's the 7th largest GDP now. Yeah, so that should tell us where the new terms are being coined, like compassionate, you fill in the blank, because they have to have their own $30 million to $40 million plane. Yeah? But what are they selling? Mostly, people are selling fear and guilt. The Sikh scripture actually says, how can you ever have a relationship with the divine who you fear? Because the relationship is not with the people you fear. Relationship is the people who you love. And fear is positional relationship, not a personhood relationship. So this is very important. Without enmity means there is no enemy. There is no other. The whole problem is the othering. And we'll talk about that othering a bit. Timelessness in the idea. Unborn, which means you cannot make a gender-specific thing or gender-neutral thing or whatever, transgender or engendering or what is happening in North Carolina, as you know. All that is based on a particular worldview. If your worldview is that this does not take birth as we see it, this is beyond those ideas, then your worldview defines very different policies. Then you will not be as biased, because we all are biased to some extent, but you will not be as biased. You'll be a little bit more, not just tolerant, because tolerant is so 1960s, by the way. Yeah? Because what is tolerant? I don't like it, but the law says I have to do it. That's tolerance. Acceptance is, I take it the way you are. Acceptance is more of a religious kind of thing, or goodness kind of an idea. Tolerance is not as great. You don't like it, but you're doing it because law requires you to, because EEOC or whoever else will file a lawsuit against you. Well, that doesn't mean you like it, right? You're just doing it because law requires it. So anyway, the point is, all of this is possible according to Sikh scripture if you are interested in wisdom. Eventually it comes down to wisdom. Centrality in Sikh doctrine is not of the prophethood in the Sikh doctrine, but of the wisdom. This is why Guru Nanak is never invoked as being that you need him on the Armageddon day, for example, or you need him to guarantee certain things to you, for example. He says, no, he never says I am needed for anything. He says, I myself am like you who is learning, and I have learned certain things, so I share. That doesn't mean these work for you, but this is what works for me. So it's invoking wisdom. The word is Shabad. Okay? The word is Guru, and the Guru has several meanings. In Sikh tradition, it means wisdom. It is not referring to some wise-looking or whatever you want to call them, gurus of India, as they call it these days, which are basically conmans, by the way. You should check up their records. Most of them are conmans. Yeah, it's very clear. Don't believe me. In US, there is a website, there's an institute called Rick Ross Institute. They track criminal behavior by spiritual personalities. And you type in the word Guru and you'll see what pops up. I'll leave it there. My point is, people are praying with an E, whereas they were supposed to do it with an A. Because they're preying on people's fear and guilt. This is counterculture of that. The counterculture of how do you create love, wisdom, those kind of things. Okay. So, if that's the idea, then the worldview becomes, in Sikh worldview, there is no separation between creator and creation. There is no power play between the two. They're one and the same. So if they're one and the same, your whole eco-theology or eco-theology becomes very different. Because there is no difference between Mother Nature, as we like to call it, or the Father God. because that's engendering right there. So Sikh view is they're same, which means you don't harness nature then. That's what we do right now. We harness it for our benefit. Because you believe this is a resource provided under some other sovereign. If you believe they are the same, you stop harnessing them, you start nurturing a relationship with. And that's the difference now, how the worldview comes about. The other thing it says is, if everyone is one, there is zero tolerance for racism and sexism, to put it bluntly. You can't use the divisions we have. Primarily, those are the two major ones even in America now, even in India right now. Primarily, you go anywhere, they simply come down to this, but they have different terms for it. It's racism and sexism. There should be no tolerance for that. In Sikh doctrine, there is a zero tolerance for this. In doctrine, practice, we are struggling as well now. And I'll come to that a little later if need be. And what that really means this is, if the mandate is not to have any racism or sexism, how are you going to make sure it happens? This is where the policy matters. It better be built into the economic rights, political rights, and also what we might call social, gender, spiritual, and other issues. Sort of all-encompassing terms we now use for Bill of Rights kind of an idea, or the Charter, or human suffrage amendments, all those things. So your belief actually becomes a policy. If your belief is not in the policy, then you're going to have a yawning gap between precept and practice. And this is where today's world is. Today's world has accessibility to information. Earlier, having information made you big. Not anymore. Having information is no big deal anymore. So guess what? The today's generation, regardless of which culture or background they're coming from, they're revolting to the idea of religion, because the religious personalities do not display love. They actually display some other policies. Yet, they give lip service to the ideas of love and equality and dignity and respect, is what I like to say, because even the word equality is based out of somebody decides at some point the have to have versus the have-nots. That now you are equal because Topeka versus the Board of Education decided you are equal. Separate but equal. Remember that? Those of you from 1954 it was. That's what I learned in US history. Anyway, the point is, 2 years ago the US administration now decided that homosexuals now have equal civil rights. So equality is still being decided by the ones who have the power. The universal idea is dignity and respect. It's given to everyone. We better figure out how to treat everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of your political or religious thoughts or disciplines. Because that's for you. If you're going to make everyone like you, doesn't that make you something like a Mussolini as well? How come we only use that word for dictators in political arena? Religiously, they're doing the same thing. We call them fanatics. We're all fanatics. We all are devilish. Mother Teresa used to say that. She said, I pray because I'm hoping the devil in me doesn't come out. In Punjabi, they use the word shaitan. The point is, there is a perversion among all of us. And the idea is, how do you minimize that perversion? So how do you minimize it? You create a vision of Begampura. The reality needs to be Begampura. Be means without, Gam means worry, Pura is a city. It's a city without sorrow. This is a direct inference out of scriptural tradition of Sikhs. And the three things it talks about: how will you create peace? How will you create stability? And the first thing it says is, in spiritual arena, let everyone feel the divine presence as they want to feel it. Do not fixate divinity for everyone. Yeah, people have different religious experiences. Even within Christianity, there are, if you pick up Encyclopedia of Christianity, I think last count I saw was there were 72,000 denominations. Yes, there is centrality of doctrine, but there are differentiations in practices. But the funny thing is, and these are not just religions, but political ideologies are going through it. Economists go through this. There's a standard joke of lawyers and economists, how two of them can't even get together. It's not just the Jewish rabbis. We like to make jokes only about them. It's not just that. It's actually everywhere. So what does that tell us? The divine presence needs to be facilitated, not policy mandated. Sort of like the project in America. I like that example because this is the closest it has come here, where the founding fathers of this country decided that, and they were practitioners, several Unitarians do. What did they decide? They had personal divinity, they had personal spirituality, even religiosity in some cases, but they were so careful. It's like what Tocqueville observed between what happened at Bastille versus what happened with the Continental Congress in this country. In there, even when the revolution failed, after the bloodshed, the commoners got no rights. Religion is related there, that's why I'm bringing it up. What happened at Bastille? They basically agreed that the certain rights need to be guaranteed by government to commoners. That's all they agreed to. In America, at the same time, they were saying, no, the rights are already being given by God. Government exists just to guarantee that it's carried out and implemented. And that's the difference. So the first part is, you can have peace, you can have eternal peace if you facilitate divine presence for people. Let's come to the political level. And this is what the Shabbat says. Actually, it's very interesting. It says Dom Nasem. Dom is second, same is third. As long as you have second and third class individuals, or what we now call citizens, in any space, you cannot have stability. You cannot have peace. At home it happens. If somebody's not being heard, we call it a dysfunctionality, which happens in every family. It's a question of degree, right? It happens in communities, it happens in congregations. Look, it's an election year. You can see the only ones who think they are angry are not the white men of particular political ideology. Everyone is actually angry. But that should also tell us where we are going with all these things. The point is, if there are second or third class citizens, this church outside had Black Lives Matter signage. There are serious issues. That's why these things matter. So somebody, if they feel, this is the pain. Pain is not just there's a pain or the pangs of separation from the divine. There are those pains which are personal pains. They might be congregational pains. But these pains are very visible. They're right in front of you. So if that pain exists, you can't have peace. That's what this is saying. Third thing is the economic area. Economic area essentially says if there's an unfair taxation, because like it or not, guys, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, it's all about how you collect money and how you spend that money. It's still that. It's still that. The question is, your worldview decides who pays more for that collection, and then people in power, their worldview decides where do you now spend that money. Whether it is the York versus Lancaster in England, it's the same issue. Or whether it is what Taliban invokes, or whether the liberal democracy like America says, or an illiberal democracy like India says, or a non-democracy like Iran says. It's the exact same thing. How you collect that money and how you spend that money. Isn't that the debate in America too, between the two major political parties, right? Where do you spend that money and who pays more? So unless that becomes fair, you cannot have peace. This is invoked in scriptural tradition for the Sikhs. This is not just a utopian vision, this is what they're saying. So this becomes a manifesto almost. What else is a manifesto? It actually is saying when religious people who actually claim to have a relationship with the divine, until they get in and get their hands dirty to solve these problems, there cannot be peace. So those who claim to be religious, this is what they're supposed to be doing. And then you have content residents. In fact, the last line of this hymn actually says, not only they are citizens of this city, but they're actually my friends. And friendship is not an easy thing. Any word with the word ship is very problematic actually. You guys know how ships run, right? It has a stabilizing bar. If either side gets heavy, it's drowning. That's how relationship works. Spousal, conjugal, whatever you want to call them these days, live-ins, husband, wives, father, mothers, congregational, political. When one side gets what we call dominant versus subservient, Or classical terminology is slave versus master. It's the same problem. This is why ship is such a great analogy. Both sides have to be equally weighed in. This is the only way to move forward. Otherwise, it's a slow to no progress, and you can actually drown possibly. This is the vision of Begampura. This is what can be implemented anywhere if religious people, especially those who claim to be religious, start doing this. So how did Sikhs implement this? So I'll give 10 minutes on Sikhs and then I'll wrap it up. The Sikh goal is very simple, guys. It's a very atypical thing for a religious community to say that. Even most Sikhs don't understand this. But the Sikh goal is not to go to heaven or paradise or get salvation even. It is to develop best in us, which we generally now call God. So and by the way, I have fun with this too, because mostly people are selling things outside this life, because you know why? Because you're not coming back to ask for your money back. So they're always selling something which you can't come back on. So I want to solve it here and now. There's pain in front of me. I want to solve that. There's a suffering in front of me. There's a relationship to be developed in front of me. This is why the Sikh history of 550 years so far, those who understood the worldview, and those who understand the aim is not to get to a sacred space, because the whole space is sacred, it depends on your relationship, they end up becoming busy. And the Sikh model says and the model can be applied. You don't need to be ordained to do any of this. It says, how do you then apply this? He says, well, you need to live in constant introspection. There you go. I think most of us just fail right there. This is why we end up making bad decisions, right? And there are classical terms for it. They are written. But essentially it's saying, and then second is you got to labor. This is a serious problem now. That's why we see more. It's not that the more conflict happens now, but now you get to hear about more conflicts because the freedom of information is happening. But we don't labor as much now. Even conservative magazines like Economists are telling us this, that about 100 years ago, when Industrial Revolution was at the highest level, because religion teaches us ethics, right? Labor ethics as well. Work hard, work honestly. This is not happening anymore, because 3/4 of the people actually used to work 100 years ago, and only 1/4 used to talk about and sell it. Now, 3/4 of the people talk about it and sell it. Only 1/4 are actually producing something. So you have all this mishmash of ideas, more blogs and more this, because production is not happening. And guess what? When you are not involved either in gardening or in physical labor, where your hands, if you're just sitting whole day trying to figure out how to counter an idea, we call this ruckus at some point. There used to be a show on PBS, where they didn't even know how to talk. They were fighting all the time. McLaughlin Hour or whatever it was called. But anyway, the point is we actually don't even labor anymore. This says you better work. You need to work. Earn your living. Out of that, spend and share. Share idea is very big. What is share idea? Share essentially is, if you really feel that you are divine, or you have a relationship with divine, then part of it is not even yours. In fact, the Sikh tradition believes nothing is yours except the way you think. And the day you change your thinking, which means you're submitted to some higher thinking, you will start doing all these things automatically. It's all mental. So the only thing we really have is the way we think. Everything else we are borrowing. It's like what Joseph Campbell says, that man is only born once. We're just reliving the experiences through others and a little bit of our own. Because that's what we do. We read a book, we like it, we don't like it, we bring it part of element. Now we might like something what they said on the V or the Oprah or whoever you listen to, Keith Olbermann, if you like him. The point is we capture these things, right? And we make them part of us. So we are reliving those experiences. Okay. Now I'm going to skip a couple of these, because all I want to tell you is, when people tell you about Sikhs, because I'm not here to tell you about Sikhs, all I want you to know is, if you do see Sikhs, yes, they do wear turban. It is an independent religion. The goal of Sikhi is about divinity here and now. Most of the Sikhs in the global diaspora, when I say global, in the world, including in America, they came to America mostly in 1890s. I'll just mention an interesting fact because of the worldview. The first case which went to US Supreme Court of a non-white, whether a non-white can be a citizen in this country, was a Sikh man. he went and lost second 2 times, and third time he won. In 1913 through 1916, he fought even in World War on behalf of this country. He was a turbaned man. And the first 2 times, Supreme Court couldn't figure out what to do with the Sikh because his ethnicity could be white. Because we are not geographically located in one space. Anyone can be a Sikh. You don't have to be born in particular ethnicity. And in that case, it was possibly white. But he had come from India. They didn't know how to deal with it. My point is this political activism, or now what we call social justice idea, they're inseparable from spirituality in Sikhs. That's why Sikhs are very, very active politically. And when I say politically, what it means is to fight for social justice causes everywhere they live. If you hear in the news, that's part of the reason. Okay, it is a large community now. It is the 5th largest adherence. All I want to mention here is, but we don't have, if somebody tells you this is what you dress like a Sikh, well, no, we don't have any dress code. I can wear whatever I feel like it, whatever color turban or no turban. A lot of Sikhs don't wear any turbans. It's all choice-based. It's relationship-based. Observation level is between you and your wisdom or the divine relationship. Now, because we are in America and turban and certain news channels become terrorists, right? All I want to tell you is, what if I show you this picture? So, this is very funny. Old Testament invokes it, New Testament invokes it, Sex and the City invokes it. But somehow, so what does it tell you? We're not even thinking about anything. That how is turban a terrorist act? In fact, the 9/11 people who created that chaos and essentially built further the Samuel Huntington thesis of clash of civilization, none of them actually wore turbans. So this is just unfounded nonsense which we are not paying attention to. So I just want to have fun with it. So what are the lessons for today in last 5 minutes? How do you build peace? You build peace by making Begampura the reality in your surrounding. Focus needs to be on changing policy matters. There's a study out from Stanford. It's called Forces for Good. It came out 10 years ago. It basically said non-profits should not exist anymore unless they're working to change a policy. It's a new model. I say, let's apply this to religion. I say this to Sikhs, if you just get up in the morning, do your meditation, do a little bit of, whatever, community service, you're doing that for yourself. That's to make you a better human being. But what policy are you changing? Who's the new Caesar Chavez now? Who's the new Martin Luther King now? They were working on policy changes. And just remind you, policy change, they will allow you some religious accommodation. But the day you fight for economic rights, they assassinate you. That's what they did to Martin Luther King. In Memphis, that day, he was after the union rights of what we call laundry, people who do laundry in hotels, because he wanted to fight for their rights that day. My point is, you cannot separate your public and private. I know we like to do it, but there is no such thing. Public policy dictates everything we do. Nobody's holding a gun in this country to your head and saying worship or don't worship. You already have that freedom. Thank God for that here. This is a country where you can have a mosque being built by women. Nowhere else on the earth this has happened, but in LA it has happened. So if anyone tells me, I tell them, with all its problems, this is still the best project on earth in America. Okay? Because here you get to experiment where nobody else will even allow you to experiment. I'm a product of that. I'm a survivor of genocide. I don't know where I would have been or what would have happened. Somehow I end up in this country at the age of 13 and I get to experience life in a different way. Okay, so focus on Begampura, which means what? Whether it's your home, whether it's your congregation, whether it's your school, whether it's your workplace, whether it is New Jersey, even if you have a bad governor, if you feel that way, okay. Point is, you're going to always have this. Remember Star Wars? Darth Vader used to be a Jedi warrior. We all are like that. We have our moments, and we don't know when we're going to fall. So you got to continuously focus on making your reality better. And let me build on that stereotype a little bit more. Now we just call them Jedi warriors. So people who are religious people don't become stereotypes. I tell this to Sikhs. We have a stereotype that we are the martial race. No, we are not. We were the poets too. Just like in Star Wars, the only Jedis we now know are the warriors. Jedis used to be diplomats and poets and the warriors because that's what the culture needs. But they were all learned. They were wisdom-driven. And some choose to be warriors. Some choose to be diplomats. Some choose to be musicians. So when the religious cultural community focuses on that, the outcome of that becomes you actually will stop practicing race and gender bias because your worldview is changed. And when you do that, that's when you're ready to fight for underrepresented and unrepresented peoples and nations and causes. Isn't that what Jesus taught as well? Isn't that why the Hajj of Muhammad originally happened? Went from Makkah to Medina? There are innumerable examples of those. Now we do it for different reasons. We are trying to emulate and imitate with a hope to have the same divine inspiration. But here is one way to do it, is if your focus at a mind level is this, then it comes down to your own behavior, and then you are ready to actually perform at a public level. The religious people have to do it. They have a special responsibility to do it. And I'm going to end with this in Guru Granth Sahib. It says, don't ask anyone what your worth is, because everyone has an agenda. And this hymn invokes, do you recognize your origin? Oh my mind, you are the embodiment of divine light. Recognize your origin. People who recognize that they are part of the divine, they don't need somebody to tell them that they're worth it or not, whether they're included or not, because that's what the world is now, it's boundaries. People who transcend that, they are the ones who become peaceful in their minds. And let me tell you, if you're not peaceful in your mind, you will never be able to bring peace outside. Most people who claim to be working on peacefulness, they're actually not at peace. That's why the anger, the violence, the vocabulary, even in today's America, and that place comes out. And what is today's America? Bloomberg did this because Bloomberg is not Republican or Democrat, so I can safely talk about it. I don't want to hurt anyone's feeling. They actually said if you divide today's America in 5 categories, by red or blue state, old or young, class, rich or not rich, race, white or minority, gender, male or female, you have 242 Americas now. So don't buy that there is a 50-50, and there's nothing like that. Things are much more nuanced, you know that. There is no us versus them here. The decider has been gone for 8 years. George Bush, that is, okay? So the point is, if you really want to know, there are 242 subcultures in America right now. Purely based on data. This is not opinions. This is data. This is what we know for sure. And this is where I invoke Madison, because what happened in the American Constitution was based on the Federalist Papers. And he had this idea even then. And the idea was extend your sphere, is what I'm paraphrasing. Extend the sphere, which means if your sphere is your congregation, extend it. And you take in greater variety of parties and interests. When you govern, when you work on policy, you're doing it for everyone. So you cannot superimpose your religious protocols on everyone. And that's the difference. We end up making this mistake. We end up taking our own spiritual or religious practice and we want everyone to think like that. No, it doesn't work like that. And you apply this to global issues then. These are the top 10 problems. You know what? The number 1 problem in the world is poverty and hunger. Do you think they care what your religion is, what time you get up, and what is your view on even abortion for a second? I invoke that because it is very divisive issue. The first thing is, and you know, last year was the first year in the history of Earth that there was abundance of food. Even Economist magazine wrote this, and they're a conservative magazine. They said this is the first time in the history of Earth we have actually enough food which can be used to make sure no one goes hungry. The only reason it is happening is because of the greeds of the nations. So the problem is not that we don't have the resources or the money, it's the mindset again. So your religiosity, I say this to Sikhs, I'm going to say this to all of you guys, and Sikhs are not very happy with me in most cases, but I still like to invoke this. I said, you're religious? Great. Let me see it in changing one of these problems. Solve this. Because this is what's affecting everyday people. Religion used to do that, by the way. Religion gets a bad rap now because of the religious leaders, and they deserve it. But religion used to solve these things. Religion used to encourage sciences, even when it went against religion, which is okay. We know the history of Europe and Renaissance and all those things. But who do you think did those fundings? Who still runs the best hospitals? So use your religiosity to solve a problem. That goes a long way. To solve a pain. Remember the pain idea? When you solve people's pain, you don't need to convince them. They don't need a proof. You don't need to give them lecture. They know because you help alleviate human suffering. And that's what religion used to do. Okay, so I end with this, with these questions for all of you. If you are interested in establishing Begampura, then the question is, do you really uphold dignity and respect of all? And all means all. There is no if and but. There are no exceptions here. Doesn't matter what they look like, what they believe in. It requires a lot to be actually able to do that. That's how you will have peace. You address injustice, but via love. Love is the tool. Love is the only way to do it. And you know, M. Scott Peck has this line, so let me invoke him again here. He says, love is not just a feeling. We all have that. But it's an act of will, which means you will do. It's an active verb, guys. This is one of the words in English language which is both a noun as well as a verb. We understand the noun part because we have those romantic feelings of love. And sometimes even at a pain level, we understand that feeling. But the verb part, we don't work on. Verb means you will do something about it. You're gonna get activated. Your religiosity, your love will activate you to solve a particular problem. And by the way, that is a non-conformist lifestyle. You might not agree with me, but just even look at the founders of the faiths and religions or political philosophies, they're all non-conformist. They all actually went against traditions of the time. Now, this is the irony. Now we are trying to make more conformists. But conformists don't solve problems. They are the ones who are adding to the problem. You have to become a non-conformist. That's how you solve a problem. This is what IT world today calls that you have to create disruption. Disruption is when you change the way you solve a problem. And the last thing is you can do that if you're challenging norms and thought. I'm going to leave with this last quote and I will stop talking about it, which essentially says from a Sikh tradition, a poet actually wrote this. He says, perpetual spring must roll in you. And I'll just stop there. You can read the next line. Perpetual spring. And you know what spring is. We invoke flowers in spring. I'm going to add a word to it. You know, just being flower-like is not enough either. What if there is no fragrance in that flower? So fragrance is what we are missing. Fragrance comes out of love. It's natural. Perpetual spring must roll in you. Just think about that line. I think if a perpetual spring is in you, which means you've figured out how to deal with both kinds of weather, and weather is symbolism for mood, mental climate as well, the political climate as well, spring does that. Spring makes you flow. Spring figures out how to deal with the extremities, which are the realities of life. Like war and peace are realities of life. It helps you figure out how to deal with them. So this is sort of a Sikh way which is applicable to 1.2 billion people. Hopefully I gave you a few ideas to think about what peace is in Sikh tradition, how it was presented in scriptural tradition, how the Begampura was established in South Asia by the 10 founder faith, and how this idea actually can be imported anywhere in the world because it has nothing to do with your religious protocol. It has to do with your behavior and your mindset. Thank you.
To join the conversation, and as a step towards dignity and respect, what we will do is be brief in your question, and if you have multiple questions or multiple points, do one at a time so that everybody gets a chance. And again, take a moment to think about how to phrase the question in a way that, you know, gives dignity to all. So I'll ask you to come up here to respond to the questions. We have about 20 minutes for questions, so if you have questions, please raise your hand. We have our microphone is ready. Questions? Comments? Should I ask questions for you folks? Please.
Yes.
Wait for the microphone. Okay, thank you. Microphone's coming.
It feels like there aren't any rituals that you have, and I wondered, that's one question. And another is, do you have churches or plain buildings or people like ministers, teachers, or can you just collect as a group and nobody's in charge? Or it feels like you're inciting different people, including yourself could be included. And then, of course, this is very mundane and not that important, but how did the idea of having a turban start and the beard? And I read somewhere that women have worn the turban also. At least I know of one woman that was in the news or something.
There's one in the hall as well.
And one last thing, which you mentioned food that can feed the planet. There's enough. But I have a very deep interest in GMOs and how Monsanto has taken over seeds. And in India, some of the farmers, the seeds are only good for 1 year, and then they have to buy more seeds. They can't afford to buy more seeds, and they kill themselves.
Yes.
Because they can't live, they can't exist as farmers.
So there's several questions there. Let me attempt few. So one is, in every religion there comes a point that there is a degeneration. That's just a reality, especially after the prophet or the founder of that system or religion leaves. Sikhs have gone through that as well. So in the original idea of Sikhs, there is no priestly class. It was actually a revolt against the priestly class. In last 100 years, you see priestly class. In diaspora, you see more, I think, out of convenience because people are, how everyone's working now, and my grandparents' generation used to say one worked and 10 ate, and now 2 work and 2 still can't eat fully. So something is wrong with the way we are operating in today. So coming back to religiosity, yes, there is a place of worship or learning called gurdwaras, but the model of that has changed for Sikhs quite a bit as well, and people like me are trying to create a counterculture to that, to go back to what the original idea was. Are there rituals? Every religion has ritual because this is how the congregations themselves or people or adherents do certain things. But every ritual is not necessarily a bad thing, because I want to just generally speak about that for maybe 1 minute. Rituals sort of get a bad rap too. You know what ritual is? Ritual is something you do repeatedly without thinking. So, you get up in the morning, do you think every day this is good for my gums while you're brushing? No, but you've thought about it at some point. Meaningless rituals are a serious problem. There is usually a meaning behind things, and if there is a meaning, the meaning is for who? Meaning is for the ones who are practicing it. So it is very personal again. It gives you perhaps a mystical experience, perhaps a discipline. Yes, varieties of Sikh traditions have that too, but there was a congregational or by the founders, there was a huge revolt against meaningless rituals, which was very common in India at the time. Now, turban, beard, some of it is become part of the tradition. It is very much part of the identity, but it is not a forced identity. It's identity, just like, the Star Wars example, Jedi warriors. In Sikh tradition, there is a Khalsa order. The Khalsa order are the people who choose to do this as an active full-time lifestyle. So they're supposed to be wearing it. But now several wear it and they might not be doing the full thing, right? Just like in any other religion. So last thing, which is probably the most pertinent and the non-trivial thing, so let me spend most time on that. I actually I was part of this documentary. It's called The Final Assault. If you have a chance, you can check it out. It's on YouTube now. It is all about what has happened in Panjab. I highly recommend a book if somebody's interested in this by a leading Indian sociologist named Vandana Shiva. It's called The Violence of Green Revolution.
Could you spell out?
Vandana, V-A-N-D-A-N-A, Shiva, S-H-I-V-A. She's a sociologist based out of New Delhi. She basically has outlined that what generally is presented as a gratitude of Ford Foundation through all sorts of seeds, including the company you mentioned, how they went to India, and that actually destroyed Indian farmers. India has the largest farmer suicide rate in the world right now, and the two most affected states are Andhra Pradesh and Punjab. So the point is, there are lots of misunderstandings about what happened. The Sikh tradition says this about how do you decide on GMO, for example, because that's what you invoked. As I mentioned, that we are not a prescriptive religion. We are asked to do introspection, which means learn the issue, understand what's happening, and you make the decision based on the best wisdom you have collected. So the onus is made and put on the individual, himself and herself, rather than an authoritative body deciding these things. Does that help? No? Okay.
What's the name of that book again?
The Violence of Green Revolution.
Thank you for your talk. It was very enlightening. In addition to the Guru Granth Sahib, is there another book you can recommend that talks about the history of the Sikh faith and perhaps interprets some of the passages, the most important passages?
Most important. Who will decide what's most important? I'm very big on
most salient,
I understand.
salient
Okay.
points.
Well, so we have no concept of sacred or profane, as I mentioned. So it becomes very interesting because classically speaking, Sikhs are not even a religion because we don't fit into that definition. Because that's a very, the history of religion approach was born in Boston about 100 years ago on how to deal with the religions or traditions they don't understand. So it's, this whole stuff is very boxed mentality in a sense. But if I take in spirit what you're saying, then the number one recommendation to understand the history, which is what you said, the book I recommend is The Sikh Revolution. It actually shows and establishes the thesis of why Sikhs exist. The passages, if you're interested in, there is a lot of translation problem. And I'll share with you, which is what I discovered. A lot of the translations are very Judeo-Christian in their approach, or they're very Indic or Vedantic in their approach, which is problematic because the language and the worldview is not in the scriptures. So what happens is you end up with some other ideas, So given that, I'm going to recommend one author. I think she writes in contemporary English. She's a feminist. She teaches at Colby College. Her name is Nikki Guninder Kaur Singh. In short, just put Dr. Singh, I guess, for now. Her book, she has a book called In the Name of My Beloved, where she picked 7 compositions and did its interpretation in as close as possible to the original spirit. Because she's a trained translator, and she also is a feminist, and she also understands languages, I'm recommending that book.
I'll ask you
Sure.
sort of a final question. Do you have any other summing up or another point that you really didn't get a chance to say that you'd like to say? Here's my chance.
Here's my chance. Well, okay, so here is, let's have more fun with it.
Right.
This whole religion and peace business, I think we need to sort of go beyond the labels. And I sort of was trying to weave a narrative that I'm a product of sort of 2 cultures. Until the age of 13, I was in India, not even where the Sikhs live, but I was actually in the central India. And then I grew up in Kansas, not just the land of Oz, but Superman landed there too, right? Anyway, the point is, Kansas is very different too. But maybe that's where I ran into Unitarians, and that gave me another worldview. That's where I ran into Baha'is. and then I visited the temple. And when I visited their temple in Chicago and then in Delhi, it was a very different experience because you're trying to understand their tradition and their worldview. So my sort of a reason to go into that again is it really doesn't matter at the end of the day what your religious belief is, because that's for yourself. What matters is what you're doing out of that belief. And that's where you have a serious option to exercise. So let's say you are an extreme Che Guevara style activist, just for example, because he was executed today, so I'm amusing. If you believe, and every tradition has those, right? We have gone through histories of religions where there were warrior traditions, including the Bushido spirit of Japan. So we should not stereotype it. Every tradition actually has those. Well, today the question will be, maybe those people of those spirit of any religious tradition, maybe they are the ones who should go take on ISIS. Because that's what they used to do. So my point is, whatever you think your gift is, whatever you think your calling is, use that to solve a problem, not to create another ruckus. Because these days there seems to be more ruckus out of it. So I tell this to Sikhs, those who say, oh, we are warriors, I'm like, yeah, you know how many people are still committing genocide? I want you to take your sword out there, not here. And that's the idea. Take your belief system, but apply it to solve a problem. That's when problems get solved. This is the Sun and the art of war idea, Sun Tzu's art of war. If all of you fought one battle, we'll win the war. The problem is, a lot of us want to fight the battles, or we want to at least be the sympathizers to fight a battle, but we actually don't end up fighting the battle. And mostly it's the battle of ideas. Do play a role in this. Otherwise, only the particular religious ideology who claims, there's a party in America, and every country has those kind of parties. There's a party in America who invokes Constitution all the time. You know who I'm talking about. But I don't think they've ever read it. This is what is happening in the religious world. They're invoking their religion all the time, but I don't think they read the scriptures. And that's the problem. Become even stronger in your faith, or no faith. If you believe Dawkins is your God, then great, he's your God. Become even better at it, but use that to solve a problem, a real world problem where a child in Sudan or a girl in Afghanistan doesn't care what your belief is. They're looking at your humanity as to how you're going to solve that problem. Or for that matter, the water issue in Flint. So you don't even have to go that far. It's still not solved. What does that tell you? That faith community in their leadership who invokes faiths all the time. I mean, city councils open their sessions with a prayer meeting. So right now it's just all show. It's exhibition. And we need to go from the theatricality of religion to the practice of religion, whatever that means to you, or no religion. Thank you.
So some thank yous. First to the UCMC for continuing to support us and provide this wonderful space. The Shanti team who pulled this up together, I'm not going to mention names. There's many of us, probably about 10 people at least, have pulled together for today. The Chadha family for basically funding the program and continuing to participate in it. Again, you'll have refreshments. You go through this door or out that door, and that's an opportunity to continue the dialogue with our speaker, or find one of the members of the Mama Center if you want to learn more about us. And I'd like your final thoughts just are going through my brain, and I can just tell you my personal journey as an activist is I worked for a big corporation, try to do a little bit. The corporation since then has moved much more in a lack of justice direction. The political systems in most countries tend to favor the lobbyists, if you will. So when I said, what can I do to help? I basically said, I need to help energize my organized religion, because one, that's a place where I have a voice, they'll let me speak, and the scripture allows me to do that. So I have more chance of doing stuff within my organized religion than anywhere else. So that's kind of how I take your words as further inspiration, and hopefully each one of us could do the same thing. So again, thank you all.